What's going on, guys? It's Rick
and Lindsay,
and welcome to week 7 of our Healthy Habits Nutrition Challenge. Now, week 7, there's no change to what we've been doing. It's continuation. But last week we did mention that there are some diets that we've experimented with past, and all we want to do is we want to highlight those things because you're probably going to be at the end of this challenge with some great skills, but you're like, where do I go from here? So we just want to give you guys a rundown of things that we've tried and why we've done them and what we've learned from them. There are many more. So it's going to be up to you in terms of that. And if you have any questions on these specifically, we can probably talk at length on these and tell you about our own personal experiences and the like. So the first one is?
the Paleo diet. And it's easier to explain it by just saying what you can't eat. So you can't have any grains, so no rice, no flour, no corn. And that would obviously include your processed foods, refined carbs. There's no legumes, so no beans, no peanuts, and no dairy. So what can you eat? It's meat, fruit, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and you can have natural sugar, so honey and maple syrup, no white sugar.
Yeah, the idea is to eat like the way a caveman would eat, I guess. And if what a caveman would have access to, what they would eat, that's what you're supposed to eat. And so one of the biggest takeaways for me was it really taught me how to eat vegetables. Doing the paleo diet, I was told to eat vegetables, and so I did, and I learned how to stomach more vegetables. That was my biggest takeaway.
My biggest takeaway was just learning how to eat whole foods, so things that don't come prepackaged in a box that's not easily microwavable. Adding more vegetables and fruits into my diet. I'd say that was my biggest takeaway.
Okay.
All right, next up is Whole30. So very similar to paleo. I like to call it paleo on steroids. So it's everything that paleo is, except that there's no sugar. And there is more to Whole30 in that it's supposed to be an elimination diet, and then so that you can figure out what is causing you gut problems, or maybe you have acne and you want to, or inflammation, you want to try to identify what food is specifically causing your issue. So the whole idea is that you eliminate everything, okay, and then at the end of the 30 days, you slowly add back in the foods so that you can identify what is causing your issue.
Yeah, and Lindsay said it was more restrictive, and I'll tell you, we did this for the first time a year and a half ago, and we had heard about it years ago. I read the book and everything. I knew all about it, but we decided to give it a go. One of the hardest things, but the challenge for us was when we did paleos in the past, we didn't really see any of the great benefits that some people had because we were doing a lot of paleo desserts. Whole30 says no paleo desserts. Don't replicate anything. Like, you're not making Whole30 pancakes. You're going to eat Whole30 foods. At least for the 30-day challenge before you start bringing stuff back in. So the biggest thing for us is we weren't replicating that. And for me at the time, it was coming off the holidays, and for some reason I got into half and half. So the big takeaway for me was I eliminated that half and half from my coffee. All the other things, it was great, but that was the one thing. It was like I was able to get off the crack of like half and half, and it was just a weird 6-month little thing where I started drinking it like crazy, and yeah, got off of it. Mm-hmm. What about you?
My biggest takeaway was probably an eye-opener of how reliant I was on the paleo treats. Yeah, I like sugar.
Okay, next is the Zone Diet. Zone Diet is the CrossFit diet. It's what they recommend. Dr. Barry Sears created this, and essentially it's eating a certain number of macronutrients to put you in the zone. And the zone is your hormonal zone, like proper insulin, glucagon balance. So it's 40% carbohydrate, 30% protein, 30% fat. That's how you construct. And it's essentially macros. You're focusing on protein, carbs, and fat in this ratio. So notice 40, 30, 30 is pretty balanced. And it's considered low carb, actually. Compared to the standard American diet, it's actually considered a low carbohydrate diet. But it's not very low carb. It's actually moderate. They recommend favorable foods such as lean meats and fruits and veggies. versus unfavorable foods, which are higher on the glycemic index, like, some starchy foods, but you could still eat them and incorporate them in your zone nutrition plan. So the idea of this, and what it did for me personally, is it taught me how to weigh and measure and how to look at food like an adult, in terms of like I didn't look at breakfast as like a bowl of cereal. Now it was like, oh, breakfast has to have a protein, a carb, and a fat source. I started thinking and eating like an adult, whereas I didn't, oh, this frozen pizza is a meal. No, does it have protein, carb, and fat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my biggest takeaway was learning how to weigh and measure. That was my first time weighing and measuring, and the way that the Zone diet breaks it down for you is really easy, and so we still use those same principles today. They use something called blocks, and we could go into great detail about this, but instead I'll just refer you to the CrossFit Journal number 21. They have an article. It's free. You can download it. It's going to break down what the Zone diet is, what a block is, and then they give you this handy dandy chart that we still keep up on our fridge after all these years. And so you just look up your food, say bread. Okay, how much bread fits into one block? Okay, that's how much bread I get to eat. And it's so simple. And so we still look at food today and think, okay, how many blocks is that? Okay, so I should only have this much so I don't overeat it.
It actually is. It looks complicated and it's a little learning curve, but man, it's super easy. And you realize that that's enough food for you. You feel satiated during that time.
Yeah. So for me, Zone diet and Paleo are the two that I probably routinely go back to. All right, next up.
Renaissance periodization. This is something that's super popular. You can't, if you're on in social media, you can't get away from this. RP diet. They have a book, they have templates, they have an app, and they have one-on-one coaching. And they start off with basically a periodized form of nutrition, where they start off with a baseline, and then they cut or mass. They basically adjust calories so that you could either lose weight or gain weight. And they use a lot of scientific principles in terms of what essentially works. And the general principles are, you have a base level of protein, and then what they do is in a base carb and fat, and then they start cutting carbs and fat as you go through. And what happens naturally is you get so little food that you start eating better quality foods because you get more of it. And so the RP diet is a 12-week program, and I've done this probably a couple times. The only time once 12 weeks through, and a couple other times maybe I stopped at like 6 to 8 weeks because I reached a goal, or I just didn't psychologically want to handle when you get to that third cut. So
yeah,
biggest takeaway for me on the RP diet was I learned the value of calories. I learned why I failed or didn't have great body composition results doing Paleo or Whole30, because I wasn't tracking how many calories I was eating. I was eating just overeating certain things like bacon and coconut milk, and I wasn't controlling for that. So
yeah, that was a big takeaway for me as well. I didn't like it though. I didn't like being in the cuts. I didn't like being that calorie restricted. It was very mentally hard for me to be hungry all the time. But yeah, if you want to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit and you have to be uncomfortable sometimes. But for me personally, that's not where I'm at. I don't need to be in that place all the time. And so for me, that wasn't something sustainable.
And yeah, the RP maintenance is going to look, and for most athletes that are performing, they're probably going to be more of a maintenance, maybe even bumping up those numbers a little bit if they're like games athlete or something like that. If you're looking at performance, you won't necessarily go into the cuts, and I think that's where you felt like the maintenance was baseline was.
Oh yeah, that's
fine.
easy.
Yeah, that's like the Zone diet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just when you start getting down into the cuts.
We saw a lot of parallels with the Zone diet and RP. It was just maybe the ratios were just a hair different, but there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, a lot of similarities.
Okay, the next diet is the keto diet, and this is what we're currently doing. We've been doing it since the beginning of February. I say keto because we were tracking for the first month, and then we started just, especially during the quarantine, we stopped checking our blood on a regular basis, and so now we're just doing very low carb. And I say very low carb, mean that we're eating the same foods, but we're just not tracking our blood, and we might be kicked out of keto because certain things like too much protein can kick you out. But essentially keto is 75% of your calories come from fat, about 20% come from protein, and 5% come from carbohydrate. So because you get so little carbohydrate, your body produces ketones. If you do too much protein, you can get kicked out. There's a lot of things that can kick you out of ketosis, but that's essentially what it is. And there's a lot of health benefits to it, or at least that's what we've been told by a lot of very smart people in the CrossFit community, such as like anti-inflammation. So, and that is something that I was really, really interested in. So when I started the keto diet, when we started, I started feeling those same effects after a month, which sold me on, hey, I should stick on this. Little things like sitting up out of bed where I felt like there was a lot of pressure in my lower back, and I was just like, oh, maybe it's just an age thing, and it's just how it's always going to be. But being on keto or very low carb, it's not there anymore. So a lot of the inflammation or swelling or bloating is just not there in relation to food anymore, and it's an interesting thing. And so it's still an experiment that we're still going through, and it's probably the longest run nutrition program maybe close to one of the longest run nutrition programs we've actually done outside of Zone or Paleo.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like it too. I'll say very low carb. I feel like I have more energy, more mental clarity. My sugar cravings are, I won't say that they're completely gone, but they're definitely a lot lower. When we first started keto, I'd say that my sugar cravings were eliminated probably 100%, but now in this quarantine situation, just added stress and stuff like that, I'm definitely craving some sugar. But I've added in berries into my diet, so I could still eat berries and be in keto. Rick probably can't.
If I look at berries, I'll get out of keto.
Yeah, but that was definitely something that I missed when we were first started keto, and we were like very restrictive to make sure that we were in keto. That was the biggest thing that I missed was berries. So I've added that back into my diet.
I will say that seeing people make sourdough bread makes me really jealous. I do miss bread. I do miss grains. And so that's the biggest thing. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. It's easy. If we went to In-N-Out right now, we can get patty of meat and cheese and be in that 5-20-75 ratio and feel pretty good about it. So, yeah.
Yep, I like it because you can eat dairy. Yeah. And that's another one of my...
So delicious, yeah. If we weren't allowed to eat dairy, we probably wouldn't be doing this long. So now that brings it up to what we're experimenting and exploring with now, and I kind of do this naturally, intermittent fasting. Okay, you probably heard about it. It's been around, been a buzzword for many years, but it seems like it's getting a lot of headway now. Intermittent fasting is?
It's when you don't eat for certain periods of time. So the most common fasting window is, or time, is when you fast for 16 hours and then you get an 8-hour eating window. But you could either decrease your fasting time or increase it, such as doing a 24-hour fast, and then the next day, the full 24 hours, you get to eat, and then so on and so on. I just started doing this about a week ago just to experiment with it, just to see if I could go for, even just 12 hours without eating, because if anybody knows me, you know that I'm notorious for being hangry, and I have to carry a snack with me because I have to eat every 3 hours. And it was just something that I personally wanted to experiment with. It was a personal challenge, and I will say that I like it so far. I think it's actually decreased my food cravings. I'm not as hungry as I used to be. I used to be hungry like just all the time. And so that's kind of helped to balance me out.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk about like I'm an expert, because we're not. The reason why we're exploring this is because of that. It's supposed to improve insulin sensitivity. It's supposed to improve your satiety and your hunger signals. So all these cool added benefits are associated with these intermittent fasts or fasting in general. Obviously, if you're doing very long fasts, there's some protocols you should adhere to in terms of what kind of hydration you're taking in. But for me, it's kind of how I naturally do things. Like I could easily go like the first half of the day not eating. So it's not that much of a challenge for me. I just do it because I think I feel more natural, and I feel like I like bigger meals rather than small meals. And so if I eat in this smaller window, I just do bigger meals. You still eat your same calories in that feeding window. That's important. It's a really good way if you find yourself overeating calories, and you can kind of like just control how many calories, because you can only eat so many calories in a 6-hour window. But it could be a really good way to stay disciplined, because now you're going to eat one very healthy. When you break your fast, you can almost eat anything. Like a salad is going to taste delicious for you, right? So like that's always what you start off with. It's always great. It's like when you get to the end of the hours when you're like, okay, I see some stuff. I need to start eating some bad stuff. But that's it. That's what we're experimenting with now. We can tell you more about it when we learn more about it.
Yeah. So that's it. Those are all the diets that we've tried, all of our takeaways. If you guys have any questions about anything that we've covered, again, we just did a very high level overview of each one, and there's a lot more detail that we could go into. So if you are interested in anything that we talked about today, make sure to hit us up.